and welcome to Stories for Wonderful Children. I'm Dan Wendelin, your host and storyteller. Years ago, I began recording the bedtime stories I told my children every night. Now, I'd like to share those stories with you. I hope you enjoy my Stories for Wonderful Children. There's a little girl named Winella, and she lives in a very special house, full of many special rooms. The most special room of all is Winella's room, because everything is scented as pink and blue except for the ceiling fan. One day, Winella had woken up early and decided that she wanted to go on an adventure. And in order to go on the adventure, she felt that what she really needed were some brand new adventuring shoes. Perhaps shoes that had some nice buttons or something that you could press. And when you pressed them, they would make you go very fast or make you fly. And she knew that the best place to get new adventuring shoes was to go talk to May Figment and see if perhaps she could make a wish for them. So she slid downstairs to the first floor, and then she walked downstairs to the basement. And when she got to the basement, she walked past the swimming pool. She stopped for a minute to give Dorothy, the dolphin who lived in the swimming pool.
Dorothy?
Dolly. I'm sorry. Dorothy's her full name. Dolly's what everybody calls her. And she stopped to give Dolly a dolphin treat. And Dolly said, "Ee, ee, ee," which means in dolphin, "Thank you very much. You're a very nice little girl. Now why don't you come for a swim with me?" But Winella said back to her, "Ee, ee, ee," which means in dolphin, "No, I'm going to see May Figment, but thank you for the invitation and maybe I'll come swimming later." So she walked past the swimming pool and she got to the purple door and she knocked on it. And she heard May Figment say, "Come in." And Winella walked in and May Figment was there and she was reading a book called 15 Ways to Barbecue Using Your Fire Breath. And she was reading this book when Winella came in, and Winella said, "Hi, May, how are you today?" And May said, "Well, I'm very good. Today's a very special day for me, Winella." And Winella said, "Well, that's fantastic. Today's a very special day for me, too. I'm hoping to go on an adventure, and I was wanting some new adventuring shoes, and I was hoping that you could grant my wish." And May Figment said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You know what, Winella? Today is the one day of the year that I can't grant wishes." And Winella said, "You can't? Why not?" And May said, "Well, when I was a very young dragon, very young dragons, when they get old enough to grant their first wish, they go on an adventure. And sometime on that adventure, they grant their very first wish. And that day is their wishing day, sort of like your birthday. And after that, every year, on your wishing day, you celebrate it, and you do not grant wishes on that day." And Winella said, "And today is your wishing day?" And May Figment said, "Yes, it is." And Winella said, "You know, I've never heard about a wishing day before. Will you tell me about how today is your wishing day?" And May Figment said, "You want to hear the story of how I granted my very first wish?" Winella said, "Yes, that sounds really interesting." So May Figment said, "Well, sure, I'll tell you, but I have to think for a minute." She sat there and she was thinking, and you could tell that she was thinking hard because little curly cues of smoke were coming out of her nostrils, which always happened when she was really concentrating and thinking very hard. And then she said, "Well, it all began when I was a dragon, a very young dragon, only 150 years old. And that's about the age that most young wish dragons grant their first wish. And so I knew that I was ready to go on my wishing adventure."
What's the first year a dragon can be in?
What's the first year a dragon can what?
What's the first age a dragon can start at?
Start granting wishes?
Yeah.
Well, Winella asked that very same question, and May Figment said, "You know, it varies from dragon to dragon. Some dragons who grow up very fast, much faster than average. The youngest dragon I've ever heard of was 120 years old when he granted his first wish. She said, but most dragons grant their first wish around 160 years old or so. And some dragons who are sort of a little slow getting started, they grant their first wish about 200 years. And Winella said, but your first wish was at 150 years? And Sarah May said, yes. Ah, said Winella, this sounds like an exciting story. And Sarah May said, well, I'm ready to tell it to you. Are you ready to listen? Winella said, not yet. Hold on, I'll be right back. She ran upstairs and said, Mommy, I need some pss, 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 pss. And her mommy said, well, you know where it is, Winella. And now Winella went and she got something out of the cupboard. And then she went and she got a metal bowl with a metal lid. And she took the something and the metal bowl and the metal lid all back downstairs. And then she went back into Sarah May Figment's room and she poured the package of something into the metal bowl. And she put the lid on, and then she whispered in Sarah May Figment's ear, and Sarah May Figment said, sure. And she took a deep breath, and she blew out a little stream of flame right at the metal bowl. And after she had blown the flame for just a minute, if you were listening very carefully and you had been there, you would have been able to hear this sound. Pop, 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 pop. And the lid of the metal bowl started to lift a little bit. And Winella peeked underneath it, and there it was. The bowl was full of popcorn that Sarah May Figment had popped. And Winella reached in and tasted one, and it was hot and sort of airy, just like good popcorn should be. And she said, okay, now I'm ready for the story. And she sat down with her popcorn and found a comfortable spot. And Sarah May Figment began. She said, well, as I told you, I was 150 years old, and I was very eager to grant my first wish. I had thought that I was ready to grant a wish for at least 5 years. But my mommy and daddy had said that every year when I'd asked them to go on my wishing adventure, they'd said, no, not yet. You can't go yet. But when I was 150 was the year that I met the little girl named Karlie, who lived in a cottage. And the cottage was near the base of the mountain that had the caves in it, where Sarah May Figment and her family lived when Sarah May was a little dragon just growing up. And Karlie's father was a gardener in the gardens of the king. And Karlie's mother liked to plant flowers and collect special herbs and flowers in the forest. And the thing that was special about Karlie's family was that they had a duck. And this duck, instead of laying eggs, would lay jewels. Jewels as big as an egg. Rubies and emeralds. And so, although Karlie's family worked very hard, they never had trouble with not having enough money to eat because they could always sell a jewel. Till one day, Sarah May was playing dragon tag with some of her friends around the base of the mountain when she saw Karlie coming running, and she looked like she was very upset. And Sarah May flew over to her and said, "What's wrong, Karlie?" And Karlie said, "Well, my father was at the king's palace gardening, and the king was entertaining a sorcerer who some people thought were not very nice. But the king wasn't really sure, and so he was trying to get to know him. And the sorcerer overheard my father talking to the king about the jewels that the duck laid, and the sorcerer came to our house, and he took our duck. He had no right to do that. He took our duck away just because he wanted the jewels. And that's not fair. He was my pet duck. He was named Mally. And he was my pet duck." And Karlie was very upset. She was crying big tears. And Sarah May Figment said, "You're right. That is not fair." She said, "You know what? Let me go talk to my mommy and daddy. I think that this is my chance to go to help you and to go on a wishing adventure to help you get your duck back." And so Sarah May went and she talked to her mommy and daddy. She said, "I know you haven't let me go in any other year, and you've always said that I'm not old enough, but even if I'm not old enough, this year I need to go because my friend Karlie needs my help to get her duck back." And her mommy and daddy looked at each other and they said, well, let us talk about it for a minute. And they went and they talked about it and they came back and they said, yes, Sarah May, we think that you are old enough to go and help Karlie. Sarah May flew back down to Karlie's cottage, and Karlie told her mommy and her daddy that she was going to get her pet duck back, and they were very worried about her. But Karlie said, don't worry, I'm going to be with Sarah May Figment, and she is the bestest and most powerful dragon in the whole wide world, and she's going to help me, and we're going to get our duck back, and I'm sure we'll be back in just a little while. And her mommy and daddy saw how important this was to her, and so they told her that she could go. And so Sarah May Figment let Karlie climb on her back, and she said, Karlie, make a wish. And Karlie said, I wish that we knew where my duck was. And Sarah May Figment closed her eyes, and she tried really hard. She knew she could grant that wish. She knew it, she knew it, she knew it. But she just couldn't. She just couldn't. As hard as she tried, she just didn't know where the duck was. And neither did Karlie. They had to figure out another way. Instead, Karlie thought for a minute, and she said, you know, I bet you the king knows where that sorcerer lives, and I bet you the sorcerer took the duck back to his home. Let's go ask the king. So that's what they did. Sarah May flew to the castle, and for a moment the guards were all very excited about seeing her arrive because they did not see many dragons fly down to the castle, and they were a little worried that she might not be a friendly dragon. But once Karlie had run up to them and explained, and they all knew her because they knew her father, they relaxed quite a bit, although they did sort of all seem to like to stand a little farther away from her than people usually did. And they went, and it was amazing how quickly the king came to see them. Apparently he wanted to make sure that they got what they needed so they could go ahead and leave. And he came very quickly to see them, and he told them that the sorcerer was from the mountains of Mopple, and that those were far, far to the east. And so Sarah May Figment and Karlie climbed on Sarah May Figment's back, and Sarah May started to fly towards the mountains of Mopple, and she said, Karlie, make another wish, because I know I couldn't grant it before, but I know I'm ready to grant a wish now. And Karlie said, oh, I wish we were already at the mountains. And Sarah May Figment flapped her wings, and she thought, oh, I'm going to grant this wish. We're at the mountains, we're at the mountains, we're at the mountains, we're at the mountains. And she opened her eyes, and they were not at the mountains. They were still flying over the forest. And she sighed, and she said, I'm sorry, Karlie. Maybe I'm not old enough after all. Maybe I'm not old enough to grant wishes. So she flapped her wings, and they flew on and on and on and on. And they had to land halfway through the day, so they saw some apple trees in the middle of the forest. They landed, and they ate some apples, because they were starting to get hungry. And after they ate the apples, they flew on some more, and they flew on and on and on and on and on, until finally they could see the mountains off in the distance, and then the mountains are getting closer. And then they were finally at the mountains. And when they got to the mountains, they really had no doubt where the sorcerer lived, because there on the top of the tallest mountain was a great black castle with a thunderstorm all around it all the time. So they flew down to it, and they looked at each other, and they wondered what the best way to get the duck back was. And Karlie said, well, I think we should just walk up and ring the bell of the castle and say that he needs to give us our duck back. And Sarah May Figment said, I don't know whether that's going to work, Karlie. And Karlie said, well, we don't know if we don't try, do we? So that's what they did. They landed at the front gate of the castle, and there was a rope there, and Karlie pulled the rope, and after Karlie pulled the rope, there was a great bell sound. Bong, bong, bong. And nothing happened. So Sarah May Figment said, pull the bell again, Karlie. And so Karlie reached up and she pulled the bell rope as hard as she could. Bong, 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 bong. And nothing happened for a minute. And then a cloud came down from the thunderclouds around the castle. And the cloud became the shape of the sorcerer's face. And she said, who's disturbing my meditations? And Karlie said, well, it's me. My name's Karlie, and I had a duck, and he was my pet duck, and his name was Mally. And I know you want him for the gems, but I want him because he's my pet duck, and it was not nice of you to take him away, and so I would like you to give him back now. And the sorcerer's face frowned, and then he smiled. And then he laughed and he said, "Ah, ha, 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 ha. Go home, little girl. He's my duck now." And Sarah May Figment said, "Now wait just a minute. You can't just do that." And the sorcerer said, "Oh, yes, I can." And the cloud just disappeared. And there they were standing at the gates of the castle. And Karlie looked at Sarah May Figment and she said, "Oh, I wish I had my duck back." And Sarah May felt like she could feel it. She could feel something new inside her, like there was a power inside her. And she said, "Ooh," and she tried really hard, and nothing happened. So she said, "Climb on my back, Karlie." Karlie climbed on her back, and Sarah May Figment flew up over the wall into the castle. And they looked around, and they could see that there were some doors into the castle. All the doors were labeled. There was a door labeled Wizard's Sanctum, and there was a door labeled Wizard's Bathroom, and there was a door labeled Wizard's Kitchen, and then there was a door labeled the Menagerie. Now, do you know what a menagerie is? A menagerie is a place sort of like a zoo, except it's usually indoors, and you keep just a few animals there. It's like having your own personal zoo indoors, but it means there are lots of different animals of different types. And as it turned out, Sarah May Figment, because she was 150 years old, even though that's very young for a dragon, it's still enough time to learn a lot of different words. And she knew the word menagerie, and she said, "I think that might be where your duck is." And so they opened the door, and they went into the menagerie, and first they walked past a cage that had some fairy dragons in it. Fairy dragons are not like regular dragons. They're not big and smart. They're sort of like butterflies. They're dragons about the size of butterflies. And they can go beep, 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 and just disappear in one place and appear in another place. And then they walked past a cage of flying fish, which was full of fish that could fly. They had fins that were as big as wings, and they would fly from one place to another in their cage. And then the third cage that they walked by was a cage that had Mally in it. And Karlie said, "It's Mally!" And she ran towards the cage. And when she ran towards the cage, a trap door opened right beneath her, and she fell into a hole. Because the sorcerer was protecting that duck. And Sarah May Figment said, "Karlie!" And she flew down the hole right after her. And as soon as she'd flown down the hole too, the trapdoor slammed shut above them, and they were in a completely dark room, and they couldn't see anything. And they couldn't find each other, and Sarah May Figment could hear Karlie crying, and she was saying, "Sarah May, I don't like this. It's dark. I don't want to be in the dark. I don't like this. I wish it weren't dark in here." And Sarah May Figment felt so bad for her friend. She wasn't afraid of the dark, but she knew what it must be like for Karlie to be afraid of the dark and to be in the dark where they couldn't see each other. And she wished too that it weren't dark, because she wished it as much as Karlie Sue did. And as soon as she felt like that, she felt a warm glow deep inside her, and it spread out over her scales until her scales felt like they were almost on fire, like the fire inside her. And then the room lit up, and Sarah May Figment said, "Oh, your wish is granted." The room lit up, and they could see all around, and they could see there was a ladder. Now that they could see each other, and there was a ladder going right up the side of the trapdoor, and they climbed out, and they tried to get out, and they couldn't. The trapdoor was locked. But you know what else the trapdoor was?
What?
It was wood. And what does wood do if you're a dragon?
It burns.
It burns. That's right. So Sarah May Figment said, "Stand back, Karlie." And she said, and the next second, that trapdoor was just ashes, just a little bit of ashes flying down. They climbed out, and there was the duck. And there was the sorcerer standing next to the duck, and his hands were glowing, and he said, "You should have gone away when I told you to." And Karlie looked at him and she said, "I wish you weren't such a mean man." And Sarah May Figment again felt that warm glow, and she said it in her wish dragon voice. She said, "Your wish is granted." And the sorcerer all of a sudden got a very nice smile on his face, and he said, "Oh my goodness, how nice of you to come visit me. Would you like your duck back?" And he opened the cage and he handed her duck, and he said, "As long as you're here, would you like some tea?" And Karlie said, "No, I really should be getting home. My mommy and daddy are waiting for me." And the sorcerer said, "Well, come visit any time. It gets so lonely up here in this castle all by myself sometimes. Let me show you out." And he showed her out, and he said, "Oh, you should take a little souvenir to remember me by." And he gave her her very own fairy dragon to take with her. And it rode on her shoulder, and Mally rode on her other shoulder, and she rode on Sarah May Figment's back, and Sarah May Figment flew her all the way home. And when they got home, they threw the biggest party that had ever been seen, because Karlie had gotten Mally back, and because Sarah May Figment was truly a wish dragon. And Winella said, "That is the best story I've ever heard, Sarah May Figment." And Sarah May said, "Well, thank you." And Winella said, "I am going to go mark today down on my calendar so that every year we can have a party on your wishing day." And Sarah May Figment said, "Oh, that would be so nice, Winella."
She was wishing for her shoes.
And she said, "Come back tomorrow, Winella, and I will wish you up the very best adventure shoes ever." And Winella said, "That'd be great."
Thanks for listening to Stories for Wonderful Children. I created today's story, but questions and clever commentary were supplied by my children. The intro and outro music is by Brandon Thompson. If you enjoy the show, please tell someone about it, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Our email is storiesforwonderfulchildren@gmail.com, and you can also find us on Facebook or Twitter. I'm Dan Wendelin, reminding you to tell someone you love a story.